All right, thank you very much for having me. It's a genuine pleasure to talk about what I think about every single day most of the time, in a somewhat obsessive way every now and again. And so to share some of those thoughts is a great privilege. Thank you everyone for having me here today. Today's talk is the privacy trap that we've seen in DeFi specifically, kind of like very much that intersection of DeFi. And what's kind of been some of the pitfalls that I've seen being played out. Today's talk is going to be somewhat less technical, but if you are somebody that's building in the DeFi space, you care about privacy, you care about these things, I think there's going to be a lot of like underlying truths here that I think will be useful for you guys. And at the end, if like something sparked from you, a little like, spark came on, please talk to me. I'm literally obsessed about this stuff and think about it every second of every day, and we'll continue to jam about that as much as I can. The case for privacy on DeFi, I don't think it needs to be kind of spelled out in this room, specifically copy trading, MEV. We all know kind of the gambit of problems that happen in the space. I've noticed that like a lot of the approaches from like many of the teams building on the privacy layer come from a very philosophical, deep like care about this stuff, very cypherpunk, it's kind of cool. And this like anti-cypherpunk sentiment I've seen in Twitter kind of like, has been kind of being pervaded with like, teams not really getting enough traction from the privacy space. So this talk is going to be less like focusing on the philosophical reasons and a little bit of a more pragmatic approach on thinking about the application of privacy in financial markets. So a couple of teams have tried this stuff out, tons of them. Really cool names up here. My personal favorite, Railgun, really epic. They're still alive today. But there are some on here that aren't alive. Now this is not a full exhaustive list. There's way more cool stuff. I just can't put too many words on a slide. But realistically, like this concept of finance and DeFi with privacy has been tried multiple times over. The company that we are that I work for, Silhouette, co-founded it, is also trying to work in that space. So what happened to the ones that worked, and what happens to the ones that like have still yet to succeed? Let's kind of like go into a couple of the three macro areas that I think, I personally ascribe to a lot of the where this friction comes from. The one is, I think, regulation. I think it's kind of obvious that the crypto industry has struggled for a little while in regulation. I think this war on privacy from suits and governments is also something that's going to be a tension point that we're going to run through for a long period of time. The other one is a lack of demand. Do people actually care about this? Like, we care about it in this room, but this room's tiny relative to society. And does the critical mass of the folks that actually care about this and want to use it really matter? And then the last one is liquidity. Spoiler alert, number 3 is the actual problem. So regulation. No, not really. Crypto's had this for a while. We've survived. Privacy laws, kind of going back from the encryption wars that happened, have always kind of been part of this like push towards being genuinely accepted. We're starting to see a lot more kind of relaxation on this front. And so from the regulation side, I think this anti-privacy concept is a fine line. Like, I think the KYC discussion will always be there, but regulation I don't see as too much of an issue. Lack of demand. Not really. Some people care, some people don't. It's actually kind of very polarizing. In the conversations I have with people, like, I get one of two answers. I don't care about privacy in one slight bit. Not interested, and then everything needs to be private, 100%. I love what you guys are building. I love everything in that space. And there's a very small middle ground, i.e. like somebody has an opinion somewhere on that spectrum. So the lack of demand I don't think is necessarily the case, because there is a very kind of distinct set of users that genuinely love the concept of privacy and kind of want to build towards it. And then the third one, as I kind of gave some indication on too, is liquidity. I think the intersection of people that understand how liquidity and markets move and the intersection of privacy skill sets is somewhere where kind of we're spending a lot of time in that focus point, but it is the distinct point as where I see most of these protocols not kind of really nailing that execution, and we'll double click on that one. Good example here, Railgun. You can do some swaps on Railgun. There's enough liquidity there for your average today swaps, but you cannot trade more than, I would say, $100 million on Railgun realistically at this point in time. So how do we get the market the privacy market to reach that size? Markets move risk. This is the finance definition. What do I mean by moving risk? A trade is going from one asset profile into another asset profile. This risk component is what, like, implicitly, whether you're very in tune with kind of how assets get priced, or you just have like kind of a gut feel, you're a trader, you're a DJ, that risk is something that people genuinely feel, and there's a lot of fundamentals that go around it. Moving risk is what all trade types do, whether it's lending, whether it's borrowing, whether it's swaps, whether it's the central order limit book, guys. Central limit order books, clubs are so hot right now. That's just another risk moving engine. It's been an old school risk moving engine, and it's kind of come back in vogue. But all of these move risk in some way, shape, or form. When we think about how risk moves through these markets, there is liquidity, there is alpha, and then we can kind of tie into what I think are like interesting private use cases. So liquidity, you need enough of the liquidity to be able to absorb some of these risk movements. If I am building out a DEX, that's how much makers and takers there are. If I'm building out a lending platform, it's how much TVL I have. That risk movement generates alpha in the market. Now, alpha is a term that's kind of badly used in crypto, but it's typically defined as outperforming the market if you just simply kept your money at a base rate. So we can take the repo rate, or we can take the Fed fund rate as like the base rate. That's how all money kind of grows in the world. Anyone that can kind of beat that is generating alpha. S&P 500 is a good benchmark. Anyone that outperforms that difference between what you would have got if you use that instrument versus whatever you were doing is alpha. Now, liquidity and alpha are so intertwined and interconnected that, like, if an area has alpha, in terms of this ability to generate more returns in a finance context, you will get liquidity. Hyperliquid's a good example of that today. Uniswap's a good example of that for a long period of time, and kind of all the centralized exchanges are still an example of that today. A really simple way of describing this is, if people are making money, they will continue to be there with their money. Kind of an obvious outcome. And that's an important factor to think about when you build privacy protocols. If there is no alpha in your protocol or in your environment, there is no use case for the privacy. Adding privacy to a place that generates zero alpha will have zero liquidity. It's kind of like a fundamental equation. And that kind of, when I say it out loud in kind of that context, is very reductive and very basic, but almost every single protocol I've seen has missed the mark on that one when it comes to like really understanding the principles of like, is the privacy here important versus is this market actually useful in the first place? Okay, so statement, I believe DeFi privacy only matters in the presence of liquid markets. You get liquid markets by generating some alpha. Very, very simple outcome. How do we generate alpha is an interesting question that I think DeFi has done a really good job of kind of supplementing the lack of alpha with like what we did with DeFi Summer and the token launches, these points programs, these airdrops. You can kind of fundamentally think of those things as my venue has a limited ability to generate money for folks, therefore I'm going to supplement this with my token. And then when those tokens ran out, the liquidity ran out, the DEX dies. There are hundreds of dead DEXs out there. Uniswap's the only one that really lasted more than one cycle. So DeFi privacy only matters in these markets. It's kind of like taking Signal as a chat app. It had to work well as a chat app before the privacy actually even mattered. If no one was using it, it kind of really never mattered. Privacy venues. Okay, so I spoke about moving risk earlier. Risk kind of is an important factor when you think about like what can you expose in the market versus what you can see in the market, and make subsequent decisions on that. If I trade and I know the price is going down, well, like that's going to make me have a reaction function to my next decision if I'm a trading platform. Now, these reaction functions, when you look at like how the decision-making process for many of the users go when you're building out on a private venue, the end-to-end privacy part here basically means you're trading in darkness, which means that information that you need to kind of understand the risk profile of what you're getting in and out of is somewhat opaque. And that is like a key insight that I think many of these privacy protocols missed. It's totally fine to be private, but you need to make sure that your users will understand the risk profile of what they're trading. So when we kind of think about these like open markets versus private user move debates, a good like heuristic that I kind of like want to see protocols taking are these open markets like Ethereum, Arbitrum, Hyperliquid. These very, very big open-ended markets are actually really good for people to understand the risk profile of the assets that they're going into. I can see Hyperliquid's order book. I can see every single trade on Uniswap. What I don't want to have happen is to be front-run or MEV'd. I can't really control that unless I introduce privacy. So in this case, the risk profile, I understand. I can look at these markets. I can understand the price impact that I'm going to have if I follow this risk-moving mechanism. But what I don't want to have is the nefarious like behavior that happens when I get MEV'd or front-run or kind of sandwiched, and privacy protocols make that so useful for that. So these private user moves, and how can we protect what the user wants to do for kind of their alpha generation component versus what the open market would do. And so I fundamentally believe open markets for DeFi, we need to keep that around, but we need to build the mechanisms that more tailored to how the user interacts with these protocols at a more granular level. It's not full privacy, it's not full transparency. Somewhere in this middle is that sweet spot that we as a team right now are currently going headlong into exploring. So that's kind of why I think most of these private venues have failed. If you looked at, I think probably one of the most best architected privacy protocols out there, Penumbra, it was end-to-end private, which means I didn't know any counterparty. I didn't know who else I was trading with. I didn't know how much liquidity was in the book. I actually knew nothing. And that darkness component was scary. And so for me, understanding the risk profile that I wanted to move, if I wanted to use Penumbra, didn't really work out so well. Railgun kind of allows you to do a little bit of the exposure, but not too much. And that long list of teams that like I saw didn't really work out previously, that's a good example of where I think they missed the mark. And that's kind of the TLDR. So a quick summary of where I think these things are really important is understanding how markets move and where privacy matters in that is a very nuanced, detailed like thought pattern. Markets move risk. Understanding how to protect that risk is fundamentally everything a trader thinks about and how they can maximize their opportunity in those environments. Adding privacy should not remove risk factors. In fact, it should reduce the risk surface. And like that is where I think a good intersection of privacy and kind of this DeFi world should go into. If you guys want to jam more on this concept, I'll be here all day. You can reach out to me on Twitter. The team is all here. You'll kind of see us with these S's. At Silhouette, we're building one of the shielded exchanges out there. And yeah, I'm literally obsessed about this stuff, so jam with me as much as you guys want.